This week's program is dedicated to the memory of Richard Binnall, my father, who passed away on May 19th, 2007. He is missed tremendously, but we take solace in knowing that he's in a better place now.
Ladies and gentlemen, Binnall of America Audio, with your host, Tim Binnall.
Hello there, my friends. This is Tim Binnall of BinnallofAmerica.com with another edition of Binnall of America Audio Season 2. It is June 2nd, 2007, and this week we kick off the final 5 episodes of Binnall of America Audio Season 2. And I'll warn you ahead of time right now, I am sick as a dog. I don't know what it is, pollen allergies or something, I'm not sure, but I'm just run down, exhausted. That's why this episode's coming at you so late. And that's on top of all this drama that went on here at Binnall of America over the past month. I will talk about that in a little bit, but we don't want to take away from the guest, so we'll handle all that business at the end of the program because we have a spectacular guest for you this week, and we want to just dive right into the interview. Our guest this week is Gary A.David, author of The Orion Zone, which investigates the strange correlation between monuments and settlements of the Native American Hopi tribe and the stars of the constellation Orion. We're going to talk about the logistics of that connection, how and why the Hopi settled the way they did, their god Masao, who just may have been a gray alien, the strange race of ant people who helped the Hopi throughout their history, the lost city inside the Grand Canyon, the global Orion connection, Hopi prophecy for the future, and much, much more. It is an astroarchaeology themed Binnall of America Audio, taking you to a whole new realm of esoterica that we've yet to discuss here on the program. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Gary A.David, let me give you a little bit of background on him. Gary A.David has been intrigued by the Four Corners region of the United States since his initial trip there in 1987. The following year he sojourned to northern New Mexico where he studied rock art and indigenous ruins. In late 1994, he moved to Arizona and began an intensive research of the ancestral Puebloans and their descendants, the Hopi. This resulted in his book, The Orion Zone, Ancient Star Cities of the American Southwest, published in late 2005. His articles have appeared in Ancient American and Atlantis Rising magazines and are forthcoming in Fate and World Explorer magazines. He earned a Bachelor of Arts degree from Kent State University and a Master of Arts in the Literature of the American West from the University of Colorado. He is the author of a number of books, including A Log of Deadwood, a postmodern epic of the South Dakota Gold Rush, and Tierra Zia, Poems and Petroglyphs from New Mexico, both available from Amazon.com. He is also editor and webmaster of Island Hills Books, an online publishing house, distribution center, and showcase for literature that focuses on the spirit of place. David has worked as a college instructor of English and creative writing, a traveling ambassador for the South Dakota Arts Council, and a professional lead guitarist and vocalist. He currently lives in rural northern Arizona where, thankfully, the skies are still relatively pristine. His website is www.theorionzone.com, TheOrionZone.com. Without any further ado, let's rock and roll. This interview was recorded on April 27th, 2007, Gary A. David talking about the Orion Zone on Binnall of America Audio, Season 2. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of Binnall of America Audio. Our guest this week is Gary A. David, the author of The Orion Zone, Ancient Star Cities of the American Southwest, a very thorough and interesting book from Adventures Unlimited Press. He's here to talk to us this week about the Orion Zone and delve all into that stuff. So welcome to the show, Gary David.
Thank you, Tim. Thanks for having me.
And, of course, you can pick up the book at adventuresunlimitedpress.com and find out more information on Gary and the book at theorionzone.com. Those are the websites. Check them out. Let's start out first, Gary, with your bio, your background.
Okay, I've got interested in Native Americans quite a while ago. I lived for about 15 years in South Dakota, and taught on Pine Ridge Reservation, taught English there, and got involved with the Native American community and attended some of the ceremonies, witnessed the sun dance on Pine Ridge, and also did some sweat lodges and so forth. And just got fascinated in the Native American culture. I grew up in Ohio, in Cleveland, Ohio, and really the only Indians I knew about were the Cleveland Indians, you know. So when I came out west here, it was a totally different mindset. And I lived, like I say, in South Dakota for 15 years, and then I moved down to Arizona, and I've lived here now for about 12 years. And I started going to the Hopi Reservation and seeing some of the ceremonies there, specifically the Kachina dances on the Hopi Reservation, and started going there and went to a lot of the ruin sites in the region, the Anasazi ruin sites in the area, and just got fascinated with the culture.
You say you were fascinated with the culture. What drew you to this interesting line of research? I guess tying the stars to the elements on Earth.
Okay,
what sort of opened your mind to that idea?
I was driving up to one of these Kachina dances in northern Arizona, east of Flagstaff, and the Hopi have settled on three primary mesas. The first, second, and third mesa is how they designate them. And I was looking off in the distance and looking at these three large mesas that they've built villages on top of and at the base of. And I had just read Robert Bauval's book, The Orion Mystery. I read this back in 1997. I started thinking about, there was an Orion correlation on the Giza Plateau. The three major pyramids at Giza were corresponded to the belt stars of Orion. And I noticed that these three mesas up there, they were equally spaced. They're about 7 miles apart, and they run from east to west. I thought, well, perhaps there's an Orion correlation right here in Arizona. And I kind of put that in the back of my mind. And when I got home, I got out my maps and got out the sky charts. And what I found just astounded me. It's just amazing, the correlation between the villages, the ancient villages of the Hopi, and the stars of Orion. There's an ancient village or a ruin site corresponding to every major star in the constellation Orion. So it's even more of an exact copy than the one at Giza. So and then I started in from there to research the sky-ground correlation.
And as you note in the beginning of the book, the primary, I guess, genre of research that the book is astroarchaeology, which is a burgeoning new field. Talk a little bit about astroarchaeology, what it is, and how you go about using different elements in studying that sort of thing.
Well, the Hopi were very tuned in, and still are very tuned in to watching the sun in particular, and the way the sun rises on the horizon, and it's kind of their agricultural calendar. They see where the sun rises on the horizon. For instance, on the vernal equinox and autumnal equinox, the sun rises due east and west on the horizon. As you get closer to summer, the first day of summer, the summer solstice, the sun rises a little bit more north on the horizon each day. So, and then there's a final northern position on the horizon. And it happens to be 60 degrees azimuth at this latitude. But the Hopi were very concerned with where on the horizon the sun was at a given time of year, because it gave them a sense of where to plant and when to plant. And a lot of their buildings are aligned to these summer solstice, especially the summer and winter solstice sunrise, are very important points of the year. And a lot of their buildings, ruins, are aligned to these points on the horizon. The major ruin of Chaco Canyon in New Mexico has a lot of these alignments. The buildings are aligned to various points on the horizon that line up with the sun at a given time of year. So it's kind of a very important part of their cosmology.
Talk a little bit about the Hopi people for the listeners who really aren't up on the various Native American cultures and what have you. Talk a little bit, about the Hopi people and what made them different from the other Native American tribes, because it did sound like from reading the book that they were dramatically different in a lot of ways from other Native Americans.
The Hopi are an agrarian sort of people. That is, they're basically farmers. They're sedentary. They built large villages. For instance, the Lakota, which I talked about before, in the South Dakota, they're more nomadic tribe, but the Hopi had villages, and they established these villages very early. For instance, this template of Orion began about 1050 A.D. It took a couple centuries for this template to be developed in Arizona, but the Hopi were here a long time before that in more isolated what is called pit houses, which are isolated structures, not villages per se, Pueblo villages per se, but more isolated structures. And the Hopi, their ceremonial life is very rich. It still is. They have it's a constant cyclic ceremonial life that they carry on to even today. For instance, the Kachina dances, which I mentioned before, they start about this time of year in April, and they run through just after the summer solstice in July. They conclude the Kachina dances. And that's when the monsoons come, and the major portion of the rains come in July, and that concludes the Kachina season. So there's a very rich cultural life on the Hopi Reservation that you can still experience today, and if you go up there.
And this sort of touches on something that we had in a conversation with a previous guest who studied in Australia and studied the Aborigines, who are obviously somewhat along the same lines as the American Native Americans. Mm-hmm. And we talked about sort of overcoming that cultural difference when you're trying to study something in this esoteric realm, because, a lot of their stuff is hidden within myths and legends and stuff they don't want to share with outsiders. How did you overcome that sort of cultural difference to study the Hopis and find out more about their mythology that sort of laid the groundwork a lot for the Orion Zone?
Well, the Hopi are very they're not very forthcoming with what they want to share. They're very guarded in their sacred lore and their myths. Fortunately, there's been a lot of ethnological research done in the late 19th century and early 20th century that you can have access to, as well as on-site field work that you can do at the Hopi Reservation. But it's always rather dicey to go up there and try to get information, because you don't want to be too pushy or too you just kind of want to feel out the situation and make sure that you're not stepping on any toes or trying to get information that you shouldn't really know about. There's a classified information that the Hopi will not discuss at all. So it's very hard to go up there and make your way there, because just simple things like the schedule for Kachina dances. You'll go up there and you not really knowing where. What village has a Kachina dance on a given day, and you have to just kind of ask around and just feel your way along. And I've come across one man, a Hopi man in particular, who is kind of acting as a go-between between me and the Hopi elders, and he's discussing this material with the elders, and they're the Orion correlation is being looked at pretty favorably up there, but they don't really want to come out and say, well, yeah, that's it, So
yeah.
what I'm doing is just putting the information out there that makes sense to me. This pattern, this sky ground pattern, and if you look at the maps on my website, you get the idea that there's something going on here, because there's a village located exactly where it's supposed to be in relation to the constellation. It's an uncanny correlation between celestial and terrestrial. Just amazing.
And to sort of delve into that now, I guess the first question, I guess it's in a way sort of a devil's advocate, sort of a skeptical question in a way, I guess, but it's more of I'm intrigued by this idea. Do they give a reason for how this pattern came about?
Well, the constellation Orion is the most important constellation ceremonially for the Hopi. For instance, during the winter solstice ceremony, it's held at night, and they perform it in what is called a kiva, which is a subterranean prayer chamber. And you get down into this kiva by going down through a ladder in the roof of the structure, and there's a hatchway that is open during the ceremony, and when the constellation Orion appears in this hatchway, that means that the ceremony should start. So they more or less synchronize this particular ceremony and to an extent others. By the appearance of Orion when Orion appears in the hatchway of the overhead hatchway of the kiva. So ceremony is very important. There's a major figure in the Hopi mythology, and this figure is named Masao. Mm-hmm. Masao is the god of the earth, the underworld, and it's also the god of death. So it's kind of a spooky god. It's a nocturnal god, one of the few nocturnal gods that the Hopi have. And Masao is really the terrestrial equivalent of the constellation Orion. Masao is said to travel across the entire Earth in one night before morning comes. So. Masao is a pretty. There's a picture of Masao in my book, and it's. I'll just describe it and this god, and see what you think. This god has very large round eyes and a large round mouth, and it's a bald. It has a bald head, and it kind of resembles a summer squash in texture. And the forehead bulges out, and the feet are very long, and the arms are very long. And the god, the root word mas means gray. So the root word of Masao means gray. So Masao seems to me to look like very much like an extraterrestrial gray.
Now, what about the logistics of, this is where I'm going sort of with the devil's advocate form of question, I guess. What about the logistics of actually, designing a whole society around the Orion constellation? Is that something that could have been done from Earth, from people who lived on Earth and just based on what they could see in the sky, that they could logistically design something on Earth that mirrored what was in the sky? Like, is that even possible, or would it require some sort of help from outside?
Well,
I use the term loosely.
The way I think it happened, I think Masao, this god, directed where to build the villages. Masao was there at the beginning of the Hopi migrations. The Hopi made many migrations for centuries around the American Southwest. And they would go to a place and build a village, and then suddenly, for no apparent reason, would leave the village and abandon this village and go on and build a village in another spot. And I think the god Masao was directing this template, the construction of this template, which, as I said, began in about 1050 A.D. and concluded a little bit after 1300 A.D. The god Messiah was there at the beginning of the migrations, and then when the Hopi, finally settled on the three major mesas, he was there to assist them and taught them farming techniques and so forth. So this god probably directed the building of this. Now, how logistically they did it, if they were on their own without this god, I really can't say, because this pattern is so exact. I really don't know how they would do it. A colleague of mine, Crichton Miller, you might have read his book about the Celtic cross. He believes that the Maya had a version of the Celtic cross, and the Hopi had a version of the Celtic cross, and they used these to position the villages in an exact way. And in fact, he thinks that the pyramids were also positioned with this Celtic cross. And in fact, the Hopi do have an artifact that resembles a Celtic cross. It's called a manco. It's a ritual artifact that looks very much like a cross and like a Celtic cross. So they might have had help this way. It's hard to say. But,
yeah.
I do think Masao, the god Masao, had a great deal to do with the way this pattern is laid out on the Arizona desert.
And he's a key figure in the book, and the illustration that you mentioned is definitely one of the most powerful images in the book. Very frightening, creepy picture of representation of what he would look like, and one of the things that stands out in the book, definitely one of the things that stands out in the book after you read it.
Yeah, the Hopi don't like to talk about Masao very much. I took a class with a Hopi woman at Yavapai College, which is in Prescott, Arizona, and she wouldn't even discuss Masao at all. I asked about this particular god, and she, it's almost like taboo to talk about this god, because he is a god of death and the underworld. So there's a lot of it's kind of a spooky negative force going on here.
What's the religious aspect like with the Hopi culture? Is he just one of many gods, and where, I guess, would he rank in the hierarchy of the Hopi gods?
Well, this god is a major deity. There's also the sun god Tawa, and there's Spider Woman, which is the female figure that plays into the mythology. And there are a number of Hopi gods. There's a Hopi sky god as well that kind of related to Masao. But Masao is one of the major gods that was there at the beginning, at the creation of the world, and helped to shape the Hopi culture throughout. So it's a major figure.
And there's a lot of, like you said, elements to their history that indicate interaction between the Hopis and Masao. How much do you think of that is myth and lore, and how much do you think actually was some sort of interaction between, a beyond human being, or whatever you want to call it, and these ancient peoples?
Well, I think myth and lore is simply a historical telling of ancient times. There's a big tradition of the Kachinas, which is spirit beings, which I mentioned before. Mm-hmm. There's a definite interaction between the spirit world and the physical world through these Kachinas or spirit messengers. And the Kachinas, you've probably seen the Kachina dolls that the Hopi carve. There are many different shapes and types, and the masks are all different, and the costumes are all different, and the dances are performed every year, and these dancers dance all day long under the desert sun, and it's kind of a brutal test to dance all day long in the hot sun like that in the middle of summer. But the Hopi do this, and to honor these spirit messengers that essentially bring bring fertility and rainfall to this very very dry land. So there's a constant interaction between the spirit world and the physical world. In fact, there's almost a reciprocal relationship between the underworld and this earth plane. For instance, when the Hopi are doing summer solstice ceremonies, the people in the underworld are doing the winter solstice ceremony. So it's almost the underworld is kind of like a mirror of the earth plane.
Just clear up this a little bit. When you say the underworld, what's the connotation of that? Like, how would you describe that to a layperson like me, or I don't want to call it like a white man? You know what I mean? How can we compare that to something that would be palatable to the audience?
Well, the underworld is the place that the Hopi go when they die. They don't ascend to heaven like we conceptualize it, or Western culture conceptualizes it, but they go down beneath the earth. And in fact, there's a specific spot in the Grand Canyon that they believe they go down into and to enter this subterranean existence. The underworld is also the place where the third world is located. We're currently living in the fourth world, according to the Hopi. There have been 3 different worlds, and they all have been created and destroyed, and we're at the end of the fourth world right now. But the Hopi also conceptualize the third world, or the previous era, being located in this underworld place. And of course, the underworld is common among a lot of cultures. The Greeks had, Homer talked about the underworld, or going to the underworld. So it's common among a lot of cultures that they go down into the earth, and there's an actual place in the Grand Canyon called the Sipapu that they go into this underworld place after they die. And there's also a representation of this Sipapu. There's a little hole in the ceremonial prayer chamber, the kiva. There's a little hole that represents this almost like a wormhole going to the underworld.
Yeah, I'm kind of jumping around here chronologically, so forgive me. But
that's fine.
When I hear your answers, then they remind me of other things in the book that I wanted to ask you about that I didn't get into the notes. Talk a little bit about this evolution of the worlds that you're talking about, from the first world to the world we're in now. But don't dive into the end time prophecies type stuff yet, because we'll get to that later. But talk a little bit about that evolution, because from the description of it in the book, it sounds like it correlates with a lot of world events that we think we know about from the past. Like the ancient floods and that kind of thing. So it sounds like it mirrors a lot of what other cultures say about their evolution.
Right. The Hopi, as I say, believe that we're kind of at the end of the fourth world. The Maya call it the fifth world, and the Aztec call it the fifth world. But for the Hopi, we're at the end of the fourth world. And there are 3 different worlds previous to this. The first world was destroyed by fire, and that might be something like maybe an asteroid or volcanism or something like that. The second world was destroyed by ice, and these worlds are time periods or eras. And the third world was destroyed by a great flood. So the Hopi have endured these destruction of the world before, and the virtuous Hopis were reborn into the next world. There's a particular group of creatures called the ant people that help the Hopi survive these cataclysms. The ant people helped the Hopi survive this first world and also the second world by giving them refuge in caverns or caves. It's interesting that the Hopi word for ant is Anu, and the Hopi word for friend is Naki. So if you put those together, the Anunnaki helped the Hopi. These ant friends helped the Hopi survive these destruction of these two worlds. And they took them into the caverns and taught them how to sprout beans. For instance, there's a bean sprouting ceremony in February that kind of honors the ant people's teaching the Hopi how to survive in these caverns. So the Hopi had to survive in caves for a long time while the destruction was going on. So I think it's interesting that the Anunnaki from Sumerians would have a resonance with the Hopi people here. These ant people were very important in Hopi mythology.
And then before I give you a follow-up here on the ant people, is there a way of dating these different worlds that we can sort of like look back and try and correlate them with other people's floods stories and maybe other people's destruction by fire type stories?
Mm-hmm. Well, Tim, the Hopi are not that concerned or not as specific as, say, the Maya are as far as dating. Mm-hmm. The Maya were masters of time. The Hopi more or less might be considered the keepers of space, whereas the Maya are the keepers of time. So the Hopi are never really specific about dates like the 2012 date of the Maya. They don't have anything like that. So you more or less have to approximate. Yeah. You might be able to say, well, the end of the Second World was destroyed by ice. This might have been the ice age, 10,000 years ago or so. Mm-hmm. It's hard to say to pinpoint a specific date with the Hopi. They're just not. They don't conceptualize the world in those terms, I don't believe.
All right, and now to dive into the ant people, because that is definitely one of the most fascinating aspects of the book and the Hopi culture. Do they describe? Now, obviously, they must be ant-like because that's what their name is. But what do they describe? What the ant people are like? Are they? Is there any sort of specific description of what your typical ant person might look like?
Well, the myths talk about the ant people, but there are also petroglyphs all over the Southwest that have pictures of what I think the ant people are. There's some pictures in my book describing the ant people and showing petroglyphs, photographs of petroglyphs, or rock carvings of these creatures with like antenna and kind of large eyes and spindly bodies, and so whereas the myths don't actually describe them, but the rock art in this area you can see a kind of ant-like resemblance in this rock art.
And it sounds like from their past, the ant people had quite an influence on the Hopis and helping them out and stuff. Whereabouts in the history of the Hopis do the ant people go away or stop interacting with the Hopis? Because obviously, we're not hearing stories nowadays about ant people. So at some point along the way, they had to go away. So what happened to the ant people?
They don't really explain what's happened to them. Like I said, the Hopi were helped during the destruction of the First World and the destruction of the Second World by these entities, the ant people. And then during the destruction of the Third World, which is by a flood, the ant people don't play into that, that scenario. So the ant people just kind of disappear in the mythological history after the destruction of the Second World.
So that's the end of the ant people.
Yeah.
And what about like a geographic location for where these ant people were? Did the Hopis say, we were here when the ant people helped us and brought us into their camps? Is there any sort of area where we would consider, ant people territory?
Well, they're not specific. You know, it's hard to correlate mythological tales with geography. There are some caverns in the area. There's a place called Grand Canyon Caverns. It's an amazing cave system that kind of empties out into a Grand Canyon. There's a passageway from the cavern system to the Grand Canyon. So the Hopi might have been referring to this particular cave system. There are a lot of caves in Grand Canyon. It's a huge, as you know, it's a huge geological formation, and there are a lot of caves, and there are particularly salt caves in Grand Canyon that the Hopi go once a year. They make annual migrations to the Grand Canyon and collect a ritualistic salt from these particular caves in the Grand Canyon. So, there might be something to, right here in Arizona that the caves were located. And, of course, there's also the story about the lost city in the Grand Canyon. A friend of mine, Jack Andrews, has written about this. He's also the artist who did the artwork for the cover of my book, but he's also working on a book about the lost city in the Grand Canyon that supposedly was found by a Smithsonian exhibition in 1906, and this cave system that was in the side of the Grand Canyon. It's just amazing the size of it. It went hundreds of feet into the cliff, and there were enough room for hundreds of people to fit in this cave. And there's supposedly mummies found here. I don't know if you're familiar with this story, but it's a fascinating one that I just kind of touch upon it briefly in my book.
Yeah, I do have it here in the notes because I was going to ask you about it. This Grand Canyon Lost City is definitely very fascinating. What else can you tell us about it? Dive right into it. I mean, do we know any more about it?
It is very close. According to my friend Jack Andrews, it's very close to where the Hopi have this Sipapuni, the emergence from the underworld. Okay, it's actually a geological formation. It's called a travertine dome in the bottom, a big limestone kind of a dome in the bottom of the Grand Canyon. And it's sort of by where the Little Colorado River meets the major part of the Colorado River in Grand Canyon. And this cave is supposed to be located very close to this Sipapuni of the Hopi, which is, a very sacred area for the Hopi. And it's also a very dangerous place to go because there were experienced hikers washed away a few years ago. A number of hikers got caught in a flash flood, and they were just washed away. So it's kind of a dangerous place to go poking around. So not many people go down there.
And if you went to look for it, is there anything like in the Grand Canyon that's like sealed off from people where you can't go and explore, or is it something that you could actually go look for?
Well, there's a theory that the Smithsonian simply didn't want to reveal this information and just sealed off the entrance to the cave, and just you can't find it anymore. And it's hard to get to because it's very high up on the cliff apparently, and there's rumors of a cover up by the Smithsonian, so they didn't want this. There's like a statue. There's a statue of kind of looks like Buddha in a lotus position inside the cave, and there are these mummies that they found, and there was a dining hall with utensils, and it's just the article, the original article that's that you can find the newspaper accounts of. It's just amazing artifacts that were found in this cave, in the Grand Canyon, and the Smithsonian were not about to get into this kind of diffusionistic concept. They wanted to keep Native Americans on this continent and no interaction between other cultures in ancient times. They wanted to toe the line in that regard.
Yeah, maintain the status quo.
Right, yeah.
And how did this story even come out in the first place? You alluded to there was just an article somewhere, and then what happened? Then there was no follow-up or anything, and they were like, what are you talking about? That kind of thing?
Well, yeah, there was this expedition described in this newspaper article in great detail, and you can find it on the internet. Just Lost City of the Grand Canyon. You can Google that and then find the article. And there's Ancient American Magazine has done articles on this particular cave in the Grand Canyon.
And do the Hopi, I presume they know about it. You said sort of near where they go to ascend or descend to the underworld. Are they like, yeah, that's this place that we know of, or are they sort of like, don't want to talk about it, or have they said anything about this lost city?
Well, more or less, from my information, that I haven't been able to find out anything specific from the Hopi about this particular cave. They're just not talking about it because it is such a sacred area. And they don't want a lot of people going down there and looking at, trying to find this place, in other words, because it is a ritualistic area that they go to every year, and that they don't want a lot of non-Indians trying to invade the place.
Yeah.
The Hopi are very circumspect, and they're very polite and courteous, but they're not very forthcoming in the information that they divulge. Some Hopis now are thinking that it is a time to divulge this information. It is the end of the fourth world, and a lot of the ceremonies that the Hopi are doing they're becoming not as strong as they used to be. They're performing fewer and fewer of the sacred ceremonies every year. And the traditional culture is being eroded by, the contemporary life. A lot of Native Americans are leaving the reservation and finding jobs in cities because there's really no economic growth in, at least on the Hopi and the surrounding Navajo reservation. They don't have casinos or anything like this that a lot of the tribes have. So, just the pressures of modern day life is causing the Hopi to leave the reservation and leave the ceremonial life. So, a friend of mine said, a Hopi friend of mine said that he expects that the Hopi ceremonial cycle will probably be dead in about 50 years, and or maybe sooner than that.
Wow.
So, it doesn't look too good. Once the Hopi stop performing their ceremonies, there's a theory that the Earth will be thrown out of balance because they're not performing these ceremonies anymore.
Yeah.
And all the Earth changes and so forth kind of point to the fact that the Earth is out of balance. And the Hopi are trying desperately to live by the old ways and retain their ancient language, but fewer and fewer Hopis are learning the old, the ancient Hopi language, and it's getting harder and harder to carry on the ceremonial life. Yeah.
Now, what about the Egyptian connection sort of here with their Orion correlation? Seems like you said, the Hopi connection to the Orion is even stronger than the Egyptian, but it does lend credence to some kind of they were on the same page of some kind. We're not sure exactly how. What are your thoughts on that? What's going on there? How did that come about?
Well, I think that there's a global Orion legacy that you can find Orion correlations all over the world. Since I started to do the research on this book, and it took me about 7 years to write this book. But I found other Orion correlations all over the world. There's one, for instance, at Teotihuacan in Mexico. There's one near Milan in Italy. A colleague of mine, Jeff Nisbet, found one in Scotland, an Orion correlation in Scotland.
Wow.
Another colleague of mine, Rob Milne, is doing excellent work in South Africa, finding a lot of Orion correlations down there with petroglyphs and so forth. So there's... Graham Hancock in his book Fingerprints of the Gods kind of suggested this, that there might be a global Orion legacy passed down from an ancient civilization. That might be the root of why these Orion correlations are popping up all over the place.
Yeah.
He made the observation that on the Nazca Plains in Peru, there's a great spider that's supposed to represent the constellation Orion, and he at that point in the book he said that this perhaps signals some kind of global cult in ancient times dealing with Orion.
Yeah, that's kind of where the next question I have for you is going to go. Is that Of these sort of different scenarios, this is speculative, of course, which do you think is most likely, a global culture, or do you think each of these small cultures were influenced by the same gods, or maybe just that almost kind of like a combination of the two, where the original small, like the very first people on Earth, were influenced by gods, and then that sort of spread throughout the world, hence the Orion correlation. Those seem to be three different possible scenarios. Which do you think is the most likely?
Well, I believe that in terms of the Hopi, they were directed by this one god, Masau, which may have had a physical presence at one time among the people. That it's not just an interdimensional spirit. In fact, the Kachinas, which I mentioned before, they say now that the Kachinas just come in spirit because the Hopi and mankind in general is so corrupt. But in ancient times, the Kachinas came as physical beings and interacted with the Hopi people as physical beings. So I think that there might have been, early on in ancient times, there might have been a physical interaction between the people, which they perceived as gods, and these creatures, these entities, whatever you want to call them.
This whole discussion really kind of dances around the big esoteric field that's sort of been growing in the last 50 years or whatever, and that is the ancient astronauts sort of idea. But in the book, you really you sort of imply that, but you don't really dive right in. It's not, I wouldn't say, like if I was telling somebody about the book, which I am, I guess, because we are doing a radio show, I wouldn't say the book isn't an ancient astronauts book, really. It's more an astroarchaeology book. But you seem to endorse kind of the idea of the ancient astronauts. So what do you think, I guess, is the question I have for you.
Well, I try to go by the evidence that I have. I'm not going to make wild claims about ancient astronauts. I do have a picture, for instance, of what I think to be of a flying shield, and there are myths. Well, this is I should say mention that this is a petroglyph of a triangular flying shield in the book, and there are stories and legends about flying shields in Hopi culture, and you just kind of wonder where is this coming from? This for instance, there's a story that's a nice story that I like to relate. It's a story about there was a great flood, which I mentioned before. It concluded the Third World. This great flood was engulfing this village, and everybody ran out of the village. And this brother and sister, they were twins. They somehow got left behind. So they tried to find out where the parents had gone because the flood was about to engulf the village. So they started out, and they met up with this creature that came from a flying shield. Okay, this creature came down, and they call it the sky god. Soktuknang is the term for the sky god, and the god. This god had a costume which sort of looked like they described it as looking like icicles. Clothing that looked like icicles. For a non-technological society, this might be the way to describe a metallic sort of clothing or something.
Yeah. But
this god took the two children up in this flying shield, and they were above the landscape. And this god was a benevolent god. He treated the children with melons and corn, and fed the children. And he said that he would return. This god would return in their dreams to instruct them about the ways to lead a good life. And then the god brought them down just outside where the parents had fled. And so the children were deposited there, and they could be rejoined with the parents. So this is just a myth or a legend that the Hopi have about these flying shields, and about this particular god that helped these children out. So you wonder what to do with this kind of material. You see pictures of flying shields and petroglyphs, and you hear stories about them. I just kind of bring that up. I don't try to make any assertions, the von Daniken theory and so forth. I don't go that far, but I do just present the information and evidence as I see it, and I let readers make up their own mind about whether this is extraterrestrial influence or not.
And actually, I'll salute you for that, because I didn't want it to come off the wrong way, the earlier way I phrased it, but I think that's a good thing, the way you framed the book, because you provide the evidence that someone else could come up with a really flimsy book, but base it entirely around the ancient astronaut UFO gimmick, if you will, and they wouldn't have the wealth of material that you have in your book, which really provides a lot of evidence for the ancient astronaut idea. So I appreciate that.
Well, it's just a beginning. I'm doing another book right now, and continuing on the research in the same vein, and hopefully I'll come up with some more definitive thoughts and theories about this. But this is just an initial kind of exploration of the material and the Orion correlation theory, basically. I wanted to bring that out in the book.
And that's always sort of like a sticky situation in and of itself anyway. I mean, I would presume that the Hopis, they're not down with the idea that their gods were actually ETs, but are there any people in the Hopi community that are like, you know what, yeah, we kind of, in this modern day and age, we've kind of come to the realization that maybe the people that were coming here were ETs and not that they just didn't know how to say it in the way back then.
Well, I think that there is a very strong tradition of star elders and influence from the skies. That's part of the Hopi culture, and it's not seen as something foreign. It's just part of their cosmology, and they're used to thinking in terms of sky gods and star elders and so forth. So it's not out of the realm of possibility. It's just the way that we interpret it today as being these ETs. But as I said, Masao, there's evidence that he looks. There's a picture of it in my book. Masao looks very much like an extraterrestrial gray, and the root word mas, it means gray. So there must be something to that. Yeah.
It sounds like actually that they'd be more open to, if the ETs were to come down here and tell us that that they were the gods of lore throughout all the ancient religions, they'd probably. Sounds like the Hopis and some of the Native Americans would probably be more open to that idea than more mainstream religions.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And we sort of touched here on the Hopi prophecies, but let's sort of dig into that now, because there's always there's a lot of talk about Hopi prophecies nowadays. It seems like we're Seems like everybody seems to think we're living in the end times, and as you said, the Hopis seem to think so as well. What gives them that idea that we're at the end of the fourth world, and what does that forebode for us?
Well, the elders have prophesied a lot of these Earth changes that are coming about. They foretold the coming of telegraph lines, for instance. They call them spider webs, metaphorically, across the land. Telephone lines are that. The elders foretold people driving on black ribbons, with horseless carriages on black ribbons. This was before automobiles came about. But they foretold these things, and they also talked about a gourd of ashes falling on the land. This was, the atomic explosions at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They talked about the time when women will take on men's dress, so forth, and with the women's liberation movement and so forth. So they talked about a lot of these things that are coming to pass, and a lot of the earth changes that are now happening. They already foretold that would happen. They basically say that in the very end times, a figure called Pahana will return. Pahana is kind of like the Maya Kukulkan or the Aztec Quetzalcoatl, that figure of the serpent that the plumed serpent that was here and then went away. Pahana was here in the beginning with Masaru and the other figures, and then what happened? He took a piece of a stone tablet. He took a corner of a stone tablet, the Fire Clan tablet specifically, and he took a piece of this, and he said, "At the end times, I'll return with this piece and match it up with the tablets you have, so you'll know me by the fact that I have this piece that matches up with this the rest of the tablet." He's supposed to have a kind of a red cap or a red hat. And he'll come with two helpers. The one helper will carry a Maltese cross and a swastika, and the second helper will carry a sun symbol. The Maltese cross, you can find Maltese crosses in petroglyphs across the American Southwest. You can also find swastikas in this rock art in the Southwest. So these are not Germanic, specifically Germanic symbols. They're Native American symbols that have been used for many years by the Hopi people.
Now you said he took a corner off the tablet. Is the original tablet that he took the corner off? Is that around anywhere? So we can, if he shows up with the corner. Well,
it's being kept by the Bear Clan. Is keeper of this particular tablet. So it's on the Hopi reservation somewhere, being kept in secret. So when Pahana returns, then and shows this corner of the tablet, then that means that the end time will come, and the purifier will come from the west, and it'll be bad times.
Yeah, and so it's in existence. It's not on display or anything.
Yeah. In fact, there's an author named Frank Waters. He wrote a kind of a classic book called Book of the Hopi. He publishes what these Bear Clan tablets looked like. Mm-hmm. There was also another anthropologist. Really, only two non-Indians have seen these tablets, so they're kept in secret, more or less, and they're not casually shown to the world.
I'm surprised they'd survive so long. You would just think that sort of thing would get lost, sort of like the Holy Spear or something like that.
Well, it's a very sacred artifact, and it's kind of like the original sacred pipe of Lakota Sioux. It's still being kept in secret, and it's just a ritual artifact from ancient times, and it'd be very very disastrous for it to just disappear.
Yeah, but you know how it is with war and that sort of thing, especially with the encroachment of the white man and all that sort of thing. You'd think that would be the kind of thing that would have gotten lost in the shuffle. But it's good to hear that it's still in existence.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
What makes them of the opinion, though, that we're at the end of the fourth? Like, what is there any specific sign that they have designated that now they know for sure that we're, or those the sort of things that you said, like the black ribbons, and what Earth changes are they lay it out in like a chronological order type of thing? Where now are we supposed to be looking for anything on the horizon here that would correspond with Hopi prophecy?
Well, they've said constantly that there will be famine, floods, earthquakes, just disastrous kind of changes that we see taking place right now. Again, there's no specific time frame involved. The Maya say 2012. Well, that may or may not come to pass. But the Hopi, they're just saying, well, it'll come very soon. They're not saying exactly when.
Yeah.
It's rather up in the air right now. Like I say, the ceremonies are becoming less vibrant all the time on the reservation, and there are fewer and fewer people doing these ceremonies. So this is another sign that when the people don't learn the language, when they're not doing the ceremonies anymore, then the fourth world will come to an end. And
from the descriptions in the book of how the endings of the other worlds, it sounds like that's sort of what happened in those worlds too. There is some hope for the next life. The people are supposed to come through these hard times and then go into a better world where the people will eventually reassert themselves as spiritual people. Mm-hmm. Well, hopefully we'll make it through, you and I, and those of us non-Hopis. You allude to you're doing some other work here. What's next on the horizon for you? Obviously, you're doing a lot of radio shows and stuff to talk about the Orion Zone and doing some extensive other research. What do you have on your plate for the future?
Well, I'm working on another book about this material, extending the material and trying to find definitely, whether there's some extraterrestrial intervention or not, to be more specific about that. But it's basically an extension of what I've started in the Orion Zone.
And what about any speaking engagements or anything like that you wanna mention or plug?
Well, you can go to my website, theorionzone.com, and find out a lot of information. There are a lot of essays on the website. There's a section of rock art that you can check out, and there's a lot of maps, like I say, on the website, so you can get a better idea of what the book is about by checking these out. And you can also order the book, theorionzone.com, or adventuresunlimitedpress.com, either place.
There you go.
Order the book.
Well, Gary, thank you very much for coming on the show. Like I said, the Orion Zone is the book. It's very thorough. It's just rich with detail, and definitely makes me want to go out to Arizona and check out some of these landmarks and stuff like that. Definitely a trip I want to make in the future now, having read the book.
Just give me a call, Tim. We'll take you out there.
Definitely. It sounds like it would be quite an adventure. The book is, of course, like I just said, the Orion Zone. You can find it at adventuresunlimitedpress.com, and, of course, you can find out tons of information. I'm glad Gary mentioned this because the orionzone.com website is just an amazing hub of information that you can find from the book. That is just you just dive in there. You'll be in there for days, hours at least, checking out the orionzone.com. That's the website. Gary, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks, Tim. Appreciate it.
There you have it, folks. That does it for this week's edition of Binnall of America Audio. Big thanks to Gary A.David for coming on the show. Of course, you can find out more information on him at theorionzone.com, www.theorionzone.com. Moving right along now, we're going to skip over the listener feedback portion of the show, and instead I'll give you, the listeners, a little feedback of my own. For starters, I want to thank all of the great people who wrote to me over the past 2 or 3 weeks here. not just after my father had died, but for that period when he was in the hospital and slowly dying. I just got so many emails. A lot of you I haven't even written back yet. It's just hard to rehash that sort of thing, but I wanted to thank you all from the bottom of my heart. I really appreciate it. This has been an emotionally, spiritually, physically exhausting experience. Tomorrow, June 4th, it'll have been a month since we brought my dad into the hospital. We actually brought him in on the 4th of May, and he was comatose from about the 6th up until the day he died on the 19th. So this has been a long process, and as many of you know, he was a victim of cancer, and he was fighting the disease for 2.5 years, and it was a struggle. It really was. And for the last 8 months, I've been here full-time pretty much, helping him out and taking care of him with my mom. So it's been a difficult situation here in the aftermath of his passing. I feel empty, like there's a hole here, and I'm not really sure what to make of that. I feel a little lost. I'm thankful that we have the audio show, that I have BinnallofAmerica.com, because that at least can keep my mind off of things for a little while, and so that's pretty good. And I'm doing all right. I mean, as I've noted to a lot of people, that my father's health really went downhill starting in January. That's when things really started to take a turn for the worse, and he was really deteriorating pretty rapidly from there. And so as much as I wish he was still here, and as much as I miss him tremendously, I'm happy that he's not in pain anymore, because he was in constant pain, and I'm happy that he's in a better place, and I know I'm going to see him again, so it's all good. It's really difficult for me. I never really opened up here on the program about my personal life here at home. Most, if not all, of the listeners, aside from some of the long-time Binnall of America readers, had no idea that my father was sick, so I'm sure it came as quite a surprise to you. But I was ready for this, and as ready as you can be, I guess, is the expression. And so we're going to persevere. We're going to move on. We're going to keep going here. I'm not just going to shut down the radio show because my dad died. I wouldn't do that to the listeners here. We have a plan, and that is to get through the month of June, and then that'll do it for Season 2, and then we're going to move on to Season 3. We're going to stay the course here, so you don't have to worry about that. My dad was a great guy, folks. If you go to BinnallofAmerica.com, there's a little in memoriam tag in the left-hand side of the screen, and if you click that, there's the obituaries there, and you can find out more about him. He was just a great guy, and his influence and fingerprints are all over BinnallofAmerica.com, not just in the name of the website, but in my writing style, my sense of humor, my honesty. That comes from my dad, and he played a part in Binnall of America, whether he realized it or not, and his influence is felt every day, I think, at the website. I could ramble on here for a while, but I'm going to just say thanks again to everybody who wrote in with your condolences and your prayers and your thoughts. It was hugely appreciated, and just really had an effect on me. Thank you so much again from the bottom of my heart, and my family thanks you too. Of course, I want to thank the great staff of BinnallofAmerica.com, Leslie, Chiron, R. Lee, Joe V., and Tina Senna. These folks are awesome, and they're like family to me. They stuck with me through this more than I ever could have expected of them. So I appreciate that so much. It's not just about the paranormal here. We're a team, and when one of us is hurting, the rest of the crew is hurting too. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate their outpouring of support during this really difficult time. They've assured me they're not going anywhere. I'm not going anywhere. BinnallofAmerica.com is going to continue. You don't have to worry about that. We've weathered the storm here as best we could, and now I think it's time to, sail into some more peaceful waters, if you will. So check out BinnallofAmerica.com every day with new columns, updates, satire, all kinds of stuff. There's something new at BinnallofAmerica.com every day, and most of the time that's the result of the fine work of the staff of BOA, Leslie, Chiron, R. Lee, Joe V., and Tina Senna. Huge thanks to them for everything. If you're a long-time Binnall of America audio listener or an appreciative newcomer and you want to help support the audio series and the website, now more than ever, your support is needed. Suffice it to say, I am wading in a lot of serious responsibilities now that my father has passed away. And money will definitely become an issue in the not-too-distant future. So whatever you can do to help support the audio series and the website will help stave off that impending financial crisis that we're trying to avoid. How can you do that? You go to binnallofamerica.com, you click the PayPal button, and you make a donation. No donation is too small, and all the donations are going to go towards paying for binnallofamerica.com and BOA Audio. Next week on the program, we're going to have Chris Stiles, the principal investigator of the Shag Harbor incident. October 4th, 1967, a UFO touched down into the Shag Harbor. Chris Stiles saw it. He was just a little boy at the time. 25 years later, he decided to investigate the Shag Harbor incident, and he's pretty much the guy who put the Shag Harbor case on the map of ufology. We're going to dig all into this tremendously strong UFO case. Why Chris decided to resurrect the Shag Harbor incident, and how he went about digging into this UFO case. We're going to go in-depth on just tons of details on the case. The skeptical Father Gaffney testimony of the divers who searched for the UFO, what people thought the UFO was, and how that was contrasted by the government's interpretation of events, how Shag Harbor changed UFO history in Canada, and just tons and tons more. This is a very richly detailed edition of Binnall of America Audio. I taped the interview yesterday, so it's quite fresh as well, and that's going to be Chris Stiles on Binnall of America Audio next week to talk about the Shag Harbor incident. And on that note, we close out a tremendously depressing edition of Binnall of America Audio, and hopefully the mood will be a little bit brighter next week, with the exception maybe of the last episode that I did when my dad was very sick and the writing was on the wall as far as his impending death. With the exception of that episode, this may be one of the toughest episodes I've ever had to put together. And hopefully you didn't mind that I bared my soul here for you a little bit. We'll survive, folks. We're going to be alright. Until you hear from me next week, this is Tim Binnall, signing off.